The Associate Professor of International Relations at the United States Military Academy and Director of West Point's Curriculum in the International Affairs, Dr. Robert Persson is the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. So, hello and welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening. Good evening. So, hello and welcome. And my first question is, so Russia is likely to launch a new offensive before the Western tanks arrive. So, what could happen in this case? Will Russian forces have a chance to achieve any, strategic goals?
I think the chances of Russia achieving strategic success with the upcoming offensive that appears to be in motion are very low. We now understand the Russian way of war as it's being fought in Ukraine. Mr. Putin and his military have very little regard for human life. And so I think that what they will be pouring into the fight are, waves and waves of personnel, recruits, conscripts that are poorly trained, poorly equipped, and sort of the remnants of Wagner forces, other mercenary forces. And so that's not a very effective fighting force. And it's certainly not one that I think is going to be able to make extensive territorial gains or achieve Russia's strategic objectives. But of course, that offensive operation will be very costly, both for Russia and for Ukraine, ultimately, if they're not successful in gaining significant additional territory.
The Western tanks are coming to Ukraine in the upcoming months, but will the amount be enough for the successful counteroffensive?
I think, every bit of combat support, every bit of additional weaponry certainly will help. But of course, the question of will it be enough to some degree depends on how you define enough. They certainly, when they arrive, will help Ukraine better defend against Russian offensives. And when that Russian offensive finally does culminate and the opportunity to launch a counteroffensive is there, those tanks will be critical in helping lead that charge. At the same time, we should be realistic that the numbers of tanks that have currently been discussed publicly as being provided by the United States, other European allies, probably aren't large enough, aren't great enough, again, to facilitate a massive, significant Ukrainian counteroffensive. And so this is a case where they will help, but certainly more is always better.
Yes, and talking about the tanks, the Leopards, the Challengers, and the Abrams from the United States, can we compare them? Are those tanks that will be provided to Ukraine are better than what the Russians have right now?
They certainly are better in terms of their fighting capabilities, their technical characteristics. They are a superior fighting machine. They're superior in terms of the armor that they have and thus are more likely to survive and be effective in combat. They're also more accurate in their fires. And critically, they are also faster. The rate of fire that can be achieved with the Abrams and the Leopard tanks is faster than that which can be achieved by the Russian tanks. So they're a better fighting machine, and again, will provide a critical difference in what we hope is the upcoming Ukrainian counteroffensive. But in the meantime, again, sort of withstanding the Russian offensive, this very sort of soldier and infantry heavy onslaught is going to be a challenge, I think, in the upcoming months until those tanks arrive.
And when we talk about the tanks, we should consider the fact that there should be an absolutely new infrastructure and the logistics made just from null. So can it be the problem?
So this is a very good point, and this is one of the concerns I know that the Biden administration and some of our allies had when it came to the question of providing these advanced tanks, particularly the M1 Abrams tank, which again is the most advanced piece of machinery, or the most advanced tank really in the world. It requires a good deal of logistical support. It requires a good deal of maintenance, repair, and of course, training the crews to operate them. And so those are all things that have to be overcome and that take time to overcome. And so when we talk about the delay between when these tanks have been promised and when we actually expect to see them in service, it's not just a matter of finding them, packing them up, and shipping them to Ukraine. It's also ensuring that that those support infrastructure are also there.
Yeah, repairing and some spare parts. Yes. And now let's talk a bit about the F-16, the fighter jets. So how do you think, will the United States send Ukraine those fighter jets? And don't you think that Mr. Biden is now a bit wasting time not sending those fighter jets?
So here, it's an excellent question. Here, I should probably mention that today I'm sharing my own personal views, and these are not the official policy or position of the United States government. But I can say that throughout this conflict, certainly what the Biden administration has been concerned about is the risk of escalation with Russia and the risk of direct combat and conflict between the United States and Russia. The fact that they, like the United States, are fundamentally a nuclear armed country has inserted a degree of caution into the decision making. And so this is one of the reasons why President Biden has been a little bit slower and more deliberate. I think it's been founded on a belief that were we to have provided a large mass of weaponry and support up front, this could have provoked a stronger Russian counter-reaction. But by doing it little by little, sort of incrementally raising the bar, we've been able to avoid that type of retaliation. And so I think that's fundamentally the logic that is holding back a decision to send F-16s to Ukraine. Whether or not those objections will fall eventually, we can only speculate. But again, I think in that respect, it's worth looking back and noting that, just as once upon a time there was reluctance to even send Javelin anti-tank weapons to Ukraine, and the same with the HIMARS systems, and tanks and ever-increasing sophisticated weaponry. With enough time, it certainly is possible that the objections to providing fighter jets also will fall by the wayside. But when and if that will happen, really is only a guess.
Yeah, but talking about the escalation, just a couple of weeks ago, President Putin has said if West can provide Ukraine with new tanks, there's gonna be an escalation from the Russian side, but nothing has happened.
Mm-hmm. And of course, Mr. Putin has a long history of making aggressive, coercive threats against Ukraine, against the West, against NATO. And we can't dismiss those threats entirely, but we also can't be subject to his blackmail, I think. And I think we have to recognize that his pattern has shown that he tends to speak more of retaliation than action. And when he does retaliate, quite frankly, he retaliates against the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian Armed Forces. And of course, this war has been a terrible tragedy. But he has not retaliated directly, and certainly not in military terms, against NATO or the United States, because I think he understands that that's fundamentally a battle that he will lose.
But if he can push the nuclear button and do something just to retaliate, so what happens next?
Well, I don't think that he can push the nuclear button to retaliate. He can threaten it, but should he push it, I think even he knows that that will be the end of his rule and the end of his regime in Russia. And so I think, again, my personal view is that the Ukrainian leadership, President Zelensky and his military advisors, have their eyes wide open, and if they believe that acquiring these weapons is necessary for Ukraine's survival, even if it means Russian retaliation against their own people, their own cities, then that's a cost that they're willing to bear, and that's a choice that they should be able to make.
Thank you. And my last question. So what is your personal anticipation? Will this war, Russia's war against Ukraine, will end till the end of this year?
Truth be told, and this is sort of an unfortunate conclusion, in some respects, I don't think that this war will ever end. Certainly not as long as Mr. Putin is in power, because even if Ukraine's armed forces are successful in fully ejecting Russian forces from Ukraine's sovereign territory, Mr. Putin will continue his war against Ukraine in the political sphere, cybersphere, informational sphere. And so in the meantime, yes, it will be a long and protracted, drawn-out military fight. But one that, God willing, the Ukrainian forces will prevail because fundamentally it is their sovereign right to be at peace in their own country.
And will the West continue to support Ukraine till the Putin's death, or as long as it takes?
Yes, as long as it takes. I certainly think so. I believe so because what the leaders in Washington and Brussels and Berlin understand is that this isn't simply Ukraine's fight against Russia. This is something much bigger than Ukraine. And really what Ukraine is fighting for when they face the Russian invaders is the principle of sovereignty and of freedom and a world in which Russia and other countries are allowed to simply rewrite the rules and rewrite the borders with force is too terrible of an outcome for us to imagine. And so it's very much in our national interest and our collective international interest to ensure that this doesn't stand, this aggression. And so based on that, I certainly do believe that Ukraine's fight is our fight and that we can and will and should be willing to support it until the end.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this a bit shocking interview with those shocking messages. But still, let's be optimistic. So Dr. Robert Person was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Thank you so much once again. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.